city the country's killing capital. That's the quote from the original of the book. Now here we are in 2014. How much of that to you still describes the city, and how much of that city you feel no longer exists?
Well, we still have horrendous public policy problems with homelessness, with housing for low and moderate income. I'm not talking about just public housing for people who just need a place to stay, but for people to live if they can afford to live in the city. Crime remains an issue in many parts of the city, although it's substantially down across the city. AIDS remains a serious problem in the city, although it gets far less attention than it used to. Joblessness, I keep waiting for someone to do a major renovation of the Department of Employment Services. The joblessness is terrible in the city. So there are many things across the board that you can say are bad. In some cases, maybe homelessness might be even worse for some people. But you cannot deny the dramatic economic change that has swept across this region as it has many other places in terms of the schools are much better. Are they good? No. But are they better? Yes. There are substantial positive changes. You don't have to align one good one with one bad one to see that this city has dramatically changed for the better.
Harry?
For once, I would agree with Tom. The forces that are bringing fresh residents into San Francisco and Philadelphia and Chicago and Dallas are also bringing a lot of people into Washington, D.C. But I think that there was a change that had to happen about how people thought of Washington, D.C. We described a pretty dismal city, and I think that if you take crime, absolutely, still parts of Washington D.C. that are where people feel unsafe, and they are unsafe, and robberies and gun crimes are bad. But look at this. I mean, when we put a final period on our book, the murder rate was close to 500 people in Washington D.C.
Chicago-like.
Now it hovers around 100. I mean, that's a huge change. Now, the violent crime is still too high. But and I also think that there's a sense that the city is functioning better. You cannot deny that Tony Williams was a mayor for 2 terms for whom the management of the city and having the city function well was important, and Adrian Fenty as well.
Don't skip over the control board, the federal control board. We got to credit Tom Davis in many respects with helping to get a control board.
Is this how your writing process actually went?
He says something, I correct him, and that he expands his answer to include mine.
We call it creative tension.
But the control board took off a lot of money from debts in the city. A lot of cities are suffering in debts. We don't, because part of the deal was the feds would take over part of the expenses of the city, and so the control board set a firmer foundation from which Tony Williams and Adrian Fenty and yes, Mayor Gray all did something substantial.
How did this writing process actually begin? A lot of people listening today may only know you two as what you are now, a reporter at NBC, political analyst on this station, longtime writer, reporter with the Washingtonian. Can you remind us of where you both were professionally when you began the process of writing this book?
I was working for Regardes magazine, which was a rock and roll, iconoclastic, long-form magazine. I was covering the city, politics, and development. I had a column called Gravy Train, and I had made contact with David Black, who was a literary agent in New York City, and we had been throwing around some book ideas, and he was actually coming down to Washington the weekend after Marion Barry was busted at the very infamous Vista Hotel bust, and he said, look, I've got editors in New York City that are all of a sudden very interested in the Marion Barry book. Would you do it? And I said, I would love to do it, but I really can't do it myself because I really haven't covered the city well enough. He said, well, who could you collaborate with? And I said, Tom Sherwood, because Sherwood at that point,
even though you didn't know him that well,
I didn't know him very well at all. He had been
still don't know him very well.
Tom says he had been. No, he says he doesn't know me. I know him quite well. That's another show. Tom had been covering City Hall for the Washington Post, and he was just at that point learning what a microphone was, working for WRC-TV. Go ahead.
And Tom, when I read this in City Paper, that when you took over the DC beat for the Post years before you left for NBC4 and started working on Dream City, you inherited this file cabinet full of source documents from reporters who had preceded you in that role, one of whom I remember was my friend Milton Coleman. Another might have been Eugene Robinson, right?
I don't think Eugene Robinson worked that hard when he was there, and he's now a talking head, and he
nasty.
knows, he's much better suited talking on TV rather than working on newspaper. No, Gene had some stuff there. But, I had just been, when Barry was arrested in January of 1990, I had never been on live television outside of the studio. I had just planned that coming Sunday, it was Barry's kickoff and Super Bowl Sunday, I think it was at the time, and I had planned to do my first ever live shot outside that Sunday afternoon, and then it turned out to be Barry's arrest.
That was the beginning of the
live television. I didn't even know how to do the put the thing in your ear and all that stuff. They had to send I.J. Hudson, a fine reporter for NBC4 at the time. He had to come down to the Vista Hotel and interview me, like, what happened, Tom, as if I were an observer, not a witness, not a reporter.
In your updated book, you write that the constant in the city throughout the change that swept over it since 1994 is Marion Barry, who I'll be talking with later in this broadcast, former mayor, current council member from Ward 8. What do you feel in the end is behind his ability to survive and in many ways thrive as a politician?
I think that Marion is very smart. I think that Marion has an incredible memory. I think that he...
To this day,
I think that his understanding of Washington and Washingtonians is unparalleled. He knows people from every corner of the city, and he knows how to connect with people. He knows how to talk. He knows how to, whether it's to a camera or to a potential voter, he has an uncanny ability. People compare him to Bill Clinton, to make you feel like you are the universe when he's looking at you. And I think that he can still, when he gets up on the dais, he may have a hard time mounting the stairs, but when he gets up there with the other 12 council members, he can often be the most lucid, articulate of the bunch.
The bit of history here, because the Barry you introduced readers to at the beginning of the original book is not the Barry at the Vista Hotel sting, it's the civil rights era Barry. To what degree do you feel that people in this town especially, but around the country, are still unfamiliar with the early part of Marion Barry's life, and what do you feel people gain by studying his early days?
Well, I think some people, either they were aware of it or they think the misdeeds that he personally engaged in, his drug use and stuff like that, they forget that. They don't want to. One of the great problems I have is when I talked about Marion Barry, so many people initially wanted to go right to his drug abuse problems, which he's acknowledged, of course, he's arrested and all of that. Others, of the flip side, just want to talk about the good stuff he did. The thousands of people who did summer jobs. There were senior citizens who were not eating in senior citizen homes.
I got my first job.
Well, but that's, I don't
Barry.
dismiss that, and I try to tell people this. You can make a caricature out of Barry, as Regardy's magazine once did, with a cartoon-like character.
Don't point at me like that.
I just did. But Barry has the great tragedy, I think, if Mayor Barry were sitting here, is his own self-discipline and his own
lack of self-discipline
created so many of the issues. It was Charlene Drew Jarvis who famously said when he was complaining about it, he had suffered 1,000 wounds in public service. Charlene Drew Jarvis said, yes, all self-inflicted. So it's he has a lot to go for him. That people like him to this day. People still come up to me and say, I got my first job, I got my first entry into Catholic University, I got my this, I got my that, because Barry took time to help. Did he waste some money doing it? Yes. But tens of thousands of other people know they didn't waste it. So that's the good part about Barry, which a lot of people just don't want to hear.
As I said, we'll be talking with Marion Barry later in this broadcast. Right now, we've got to take a short break. If you have calls, stay on the line. We'll try to get to your calls as quickly as possible. The number is 800-433-8850. Well, heck, before we take a break, let me take a call anyway. Let's start with Cosby in Washington, D.C. Cosby, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call. quick question. How do you all envision this book as a teaching tool? And, of course, I want to invite everyone to the event on Thursday at the Martin Luther King Library to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the book.
What time is it?
What? 7 o'clock.
Okay.
7 o'clock?
7 o'clock.
At the Martin Luther King Library Friday. Question. How would you see Dream City being used as a teaching tool?
Well, I think it's a pretty good teaching tool because we don't just talk about the last 20 years. I mean, we go back to the origins of Washington, D.C., when there were slaves being traded on the Georgetown Wharf, for God's sake. And I think it's also incredibly instructive to see how the Congress and the Senate treated Washington, the city behind the monuments, as a plantation for decades and decades and decades.
Which is what I was going to get to next.
These were classic white supremacists before we knew that there was a term, who really wanted to basically, keep their heels down on African Americans who lived in Washington, D.C. It was unabashed. I think that's an important part of the city's story that presages and also, has an effect on how Washington functions right now. We are still a ward of the federal government.
Yes, we are. The nation's capital is the most un-American place in America. The lack of voting rights, the ability to determine our own affairs. We've already had these fights about that. We're having to fight a court case now about the budget autonomy. All that means is to spend the money you raise. We're having congressional hearings just this past Friday on whether we would decriminalize marijuana. I mean, everything we do, if Congress decides it wants a Ferris wheel on the National Mall, then by God, we'll put a Ferris wheel in the National Mall, and if we don't want one, they can tell us to have one anyway.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we will talk about not only the relationship that the city has to the federal government and to Congress, but about the new section in Dream City, Race, Power, and the Revival of Washington, D.C. I'm Kojo Nand. Welcome back. We're talking with Tom Sherwood and Harry Jaffe. They are the co-authors of the book Dream City, Race, Power, and the Decline, and now Revival of Washington, D.C. It's available for the first time as an ebook through Amazon, complete with a new preface and afterword. You can also listen to today's conversation. It is streaming at our website, kojoshow.org. Harry Jaffe is the national editor at Washingtonian. Tom Sherwood is WAMU 88.5's resident political analyst and a reporter for NBC4 and a columnist for the current newspapers. One of the first scenes you paint in Dream City is a collision of federal Washington and local D.C., the murder of a congressional aide in the early 1990s that provoked Alabama Senator Richard Shelby to introduce a measure to bring the death penalty to the district. Why did you find that story to be so illuminating?
Because crime sells. and it also was, one of the rare moments when, a crime. I mean, people were dying, 5 a day sometimes in Washington D.C. But the fact that a congressional aide got the attention of a senator, I think it spoke to. It allowed us to talk about what was going on in the streets, and also how Washington, D.C. is ultimately controlled by Congress.
No, even though this was a low-level aide, it was part of the power elite of Washington. It wasn't just another guy in Southeast, which is the way a lot of people treated it. This is a guy who gets killed on
Oh my God, a white person.
Oh, I was going to mention that he's a white guy, and he's on his way to a 7-Eleven or something like that. I can't remember all the details. But that's crime is dramatic no matter what story you look at. If crime is dramatic.
Your story is not as neat and simple as one about tension between blacks and whites, even though race is one of the ongoing factors in the city's politics, or about the affluent and the poor. It's about who created what D.C. became, who benefited from it, and who was left behind. Few characters are as central to that story as developers, including a group of white developers who supported Marion Barry's rise. Tell us about Jeff Cohen and why you feel he's an important part of this story.
He was a Washingtonian. He befriended Marion Barry. They,
Godfather too.
They were in many ways kindred spirits, but Jeff was also in it for the money. And so while he would take Marion to his vacation spot up in Nantucket, he would also be cutting deals for property and getting, buildings for $1. And then hoping to flip them for a lot more money. I think that Marion was very, very smart in that he befriended and had relationships with the moneyed folks of Washington. Keep in mind that one of his first positions on the city council was finance and revenue, and he used that to, make connections with all the developers, all the builders, and they understood at that point that the pay-to-play kind of operations in Washington that we still see operated back then.
But it wasn't pay-to-play illegal. The issue was that in this city, the economy, the government, and the whole city was run by essentially white people, and the majority, 70-something% African-American city. So just as Maynard Jackson did in Atlanta and other people did in other cities, they said you cannot come in and reap the benefit of your business in this city and shut out African Americans. Barry opened the doors to not only the government offices, but to the real estate offices and the law firms in town, along with many other people. Barry didn't do it himself, obviously. But he said, if you're going to be in and of the district, then you have to share this economic wealth and include people who can do jobs.
That helped Marion's friends. He had a chosen few who he brought into the circles.
Right, but the larger picture is whatever corruption, whatever.
I didn't call it corrupt.
I didn't say. Well, I wouldn't have said that either if I had finished my sentence. Whatever problems there were with the management of these various programs, but again, whether they were senior citizen homes or whatever, or getting people into business, Barry said, you cannot exclude us, and that has been his lifelong position.
A few years after you published this book, speaking of economic development in the city, the MCI Center opened in Chinatown. It was a moment that preceded changes all over the city. A lot of people see it as one of the pivotal points of the city's rise, if you will, but that project started on Marion Barry's watch. Yeah. Even at that, though, it's a complicated story.
Right, and Abe Poland gets a lot of credit for deciding to build downtown, but he didn't. Everybody thinks he just built this, snapped his fingers and built this couple $100 million arena by himself. He did not. The city prepared the land, and I think he moved a metro station, not a station, but a line. And the city spent well over $125 million on land accumulation, remediation of the land that was polluted. And so it was a partnership between the taxpayers of the city and Abe Poland and Marion Barry.
I think that one of the things that Marion Barry could do is Marion could make a deal.
Make a deal. There you go.
And
remember, Sharon Pratt Kelly couldn't get it done.
I was going to bring that up. If you hadn't interrupted me, I would have said something about that.
Say it anyway.
the Redskins was in play. The Redskins Stadium was in play. They had been at RFK for years and years. RFK, as we all know, was a baseball park, not for football. And so Jack Kent Cooke said, I need a new stadium for my team. And instead of making a deal, he and Sharon Pratt Kelly, got into a bit of a catfight. She called him a billionaire bully. He said she was a nice lady. She took offense, and it just turned out badly. And now, of course, the Redskins are out in Prince George's County. Marion I would say that if Marion Barry had been mayor, that the Redskins would be playing in Washington, D.C. right now.
On to John in Falls Church, Virginia. John, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I lived in D.C. in the early 90s, and just a couple of comments. One about Barry being very good at playing politics. When you talk about racial politics in the city, I think he was one of the worst offenders to stoking tensions. I was in that infamous crowd that he flipped off at a rally one day, and when he was taken to task for it, he basically said, well, it's just all the white people don't like me, where at the same rally, either just before him or just after him, Jesse Jackson spoke and got a resounding ovation. So it just seemed that he tried to blame everything and everybody else when something went wrong. As to why the things are developing the way they are now, I mean, it's been a long time in the pipeline. I worked on the Green Line project in Anacostia back in '87 and '88. And we knew that area around there, once that was completed, would go from what it was, which was, a very blighted area, to where now it's some of the hottest real estate in the district. And I think that trend is going to continue, and things like affordable housing are going to really take a hit. And just in general, I don't know that the city is going to turn all that much whiter, but it's going to turn a lot wealthier. And I think that's across all groups.
The demographics of the city are changing.
Yes, well, let me say how much they have dramatically changed. In the last 20 years, they have gone from 70%, nearly 70% African American, to just under 50% African American. So there is a dramatic change. Barry's often accused of racial politics, and people can point to specific things he's done. I think he was talking about the Adams Morgan Day event where the crowd was booing Barry, and he saluted them. I'm not sure. The crowd was a big crowd. There's all kinds of people, but I understand the meaning of the.
But if you read Dream City, you'll understand how Barry's support base essentially shifted over the years from his early endorsements by the Washington Post and the people who read the Washington Post to how it evolved in later years. But you're going to have to read the book to find out all of that. But speaking of racial politics, there's a section in the New Afterword where you write that Anthony Williams and John Hill, the head of the control board at that time, were emblematic of a post-civil rights generation of leadership in the district. What did you mean by that?
Well, I guess the leadership became less focused on righting wrongs and discrimination and that kind of a battle for civil rights, and more interested in, can this city function? Can a city deliver services? Can the trash get picked up? Can the snow get removed? Will people answer the phones? I mean, it's called public service for a reason, and I think that that was happening all over the country. That wasn't just in Washington, D.C. I think that John Hill and Tony Williams brought that to that feeling to Washington, and I also think that that's one of the reasons why Anthony Williams was elected mayor.
I'm glad you brought that up, because my next question is, how would you explain the ascent of Anthony Williams in the wake of Barry deciding not to seek re-election in 1998, but we got a tweet from one Marie Dressel, who was one of the key supporters, one of the drafters, if you will, of Anthony Williams' first mayoral campaign in 1998. It's Barry taught constituents to think he was the only one who could get government to work, not to demand that government should work for all.
That is true. It was Betty Ann Kane, a former council member, who once said when she was trying to mount a campaign for mayor, that she was speaking of the senior citizens. She says she has these Betty Ann Kane said of Barry, he has these people believing that they will starve to death if he's not mayor.
Well,
And it was kind of true.
And that's a gift for Marion.
how do you explain the ascent of Anthony Williams?
Well, it's classic. It's the very opposite of Barry. Barry, outgoing, hail fellow, well met, negotiate with anybody about anything. And then here comes Tony Williams, pocket protector in his shirt.
Well, we had a
shy.
control board running our affairs. Keep in mind that,
Yeah, but Barry was picked Tony Williams.
I understand that, but this is a city that had lost self-control. The limited self-government that we had been basically snatched away, and the control board and Congress basically neutered Marion. I think that F.E. Barry said castrated him, as a matter of fact. And so I think that the residents of Washington, D.C., thinking about whether their votes counted in self-determination, realized that something had to change
They
here.
also did that to the council members, too. They took the power, which was the whole point of the control board.
And created the position of Chief Financial Officer
Congress
of the District of Columbia, and Anthony Williams was the first person to occupy that position. However, he was selected by Marion Barry after being recommended
by whom?
I think that we have kind of an untold story here, and Sherwood and I, being news people, we like to have a little bit of news in what we do. How did Tony Williams get to Marion Barry? Jeff Thompson.
That name sounds familiar.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, Jeff Thompson, of course, is the money man in all the shadow campaign. They pled guilty back in March, and he's been very big in the news of scandal, but a lot of people don't realize that he had insinuated himself, that's not the right word, he had become so much part of the city that he was able to go to Tony Williams and talk to him about becoming the CFO for Marion Barry under the control board, which ultimately led to Tony Williams running for mayor. It's quite the story.
You know that Tom Lindenfeld was the political brain of Anthony Williams' first campaign for mayors, and that he grounded it on the twin themes of A, proven competence, and B, the city's need for change. Lindenfeld is one of the strategists who was behind Adrian Fenty's campaign. He's now behind Muriel Bowser's current campaign, one in which change is a word that was thrown around quite a bit during a primary against Vincent Gray. What do you make of the undercurrents of these two campaigns?
I just think we throw away the sidecars and just hire Tom Lindenfeld as mayor.
No, I think that this is a city because local Washington politics is a kind of a backwater. It hasn't attracted that many professional political consultants.
That's not true.
Well, how do you explain Tom Lindenfeld being so central to these many campaigns?
Two campaigns, and now
Three.
being central in a third that has won the Democratic primary.
So maybe people like going with a winner.
You both note that U.S. Senator Mary Landrieu offered to write into federal law the power for Anthony Williams to take over the city's schools and dissolve the school board. It was Adrian Fenty's signature move, but why did Anthony Williams turn her down?
I think that he lacked the political sense that he could pull it off. And
well, he initially wanted it, but the other people around him were saying, "Look, you got enough to do, taking on the schools."
And so he just didn't do it.
Well, he did it. It was a half-baked job.
Right.
He had a hybrid school board. It was half appointed, half elected, and it really was
a half in there somewhere.
Yeah, and it just was a disaster, and nothing happened. And that's one of the things that I imagine Anthony Williams would like to take back. It certainly gave an opening for Adrian Fenty to do what Anthony Williams could have done.
I think the big sweep of this, of what we've written in the last this new afterwards, is that since the near bankruptcy of the city in the 90s, I think what Harry did in his writing style and my working with it, is that we show that there's now been a continuum from the control board, from Mayor Williams, from Mayor Fenty, and Mayor Gray, and we don't know what's going to be next with whoever wins in November, but there has been a continuum of this city getting better, on the right track. Lots of problems, we could cite them all. I'm sure the DC Fiscal Policy Institute could tell me some of them, but the whole nature of the way the city is seen now is changed, and that's what's changed in the last 20 years.
We're running out of time here, and we're going to be talking with former mayor and council member Marion Barry. In our next segment, he joins us by phone. But before you leave, there's a clarification that needs to be made between what Dream City is all about, covering 20 years of the city's politics, and what the upcoming, possibly upcoming HBO movie is going to be all about, because a lot of people conflate the two things and think that the HBO movie is merely a movie version of Dream City. It's not.
No, it is not. Dream City is a book of a lot of life work that Harry and I have put into the book and the new version of it. Apart from that, HBO bought the rights to use our book in a movie. If they want to make Marion Barry into Christine Quinn in New York and have all her issues up there in New York, they can do that. They can make any movie they want. They ask us to be available if they have any questions. I don't think Spike Lee or Eddie Murphy has any questions for us. So the movie is separate from us. They're focusing on the mayor doesn't like it, but they're focusing more on the Vista Sting and some other parts of the dramatic parts of Barry's life, not his whole life. Our book talks about not just Barry, but the whole life of the city, and those are significantly different.
Having said that, I think that Marion Barry is a Shakespearean flawed person, character. And you go anywhere in the world, mention Marion Barry, and people will know who he is and the power that he had and the power that he would, squandered, if you will.
Well, feel free to stick around while we talk with the former mayor.
He did many good
council
things,
member.
but he had enough bad that, when people want to remember good or bad, what do they remember?
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be joined by former mayor, current Ward 8 council member, Marion Barry. You can call us with your comments and questions, 800-433-8850. What pieces of local D.C. history do you find are most often misunderstood or unappreciated? Give us a call, 800-433-8850. I'm Kojo Nam. Welcome back. Tom Sherwood and Harry Jaffe, co-authors of Dream City, are still in studio with us, but joining us now by phone is Marion Barry, former mayor of the District of Columbia. He's currently a member of the D.C. Council. He's a Democrat who represents Ward 8. Mayor Barry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'd like to be there, but I'm at a hearing about affordable housing on the BK site, so otherwise I would have been right there in the studio.
Yeah, we wanted you here in the studio, but you've got an autobiography coming out later this year. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, it's my life story. It's going to be released June 17th, and Tom Sherwood and Harry Jaffe are trying to exploit me. I'm tired of being exploited. The citizens are tired of being exploited by them.
Is this book going to cover from Itta, Mississippi, all the way to the year 2014?
Absolutely. I have a wonderful story. I've overcome so many odds, but the Dream City does not reflect Marion Barry's life. It has a lot of desensitization in it, a lot of errors in it, but more important, it's exploitive. Yeah.
Well, Tom and Harry make clear that if the original publication of this book was about a city in decline, that we're talking about a different city today in 2014. What do you see when you look at DC, do you see a city undergoing a revival?
Not undergoing, even at that time. They were, the city was on the upswing. Harry Jaffe has never said anything positive about our city, about me. And Tommy Sherwood is exploiting me. He got a job at Channel 4 because he was a Barry expert. And I'm tired of it. The citizens are tired of it.
Well, they mentioned that you have a very strong and celebrated history in civil rights, that in fact you were a mayor, that as a council member of the city who was the head of the Committee on Finance, that you understood a lot about development in the city. The book has quite a few complimentary things to say about you.
But the bad outweighs the good.
And so you think your book is going to remedy that situation?
Absolutely.
What do you see?
My book is truthful. It's educational. And it's going to be inspiration to a lot of people, mostly black people, and to how you can overcome the odds. I overcame being born black and poor in Mississippi. God gave me some gifts to help me overcome those things.
You
and
said
I want the public to know that Harry Jaffe, Tom Sherwood, have been exploitive. Tell us to stop exploiting black folks. That day is over with. We want that people exploit black people and get away with it.
when you say that the revival of the city began under your tenure, can you explain for our audience what you mean by that and how what they see in the city today is, in your view, rooted in your stewardship of the city?
Well, when I came into office, Washington, D.C. was like a sleepy southern town. And Pennsylvania Avenue didn't have any new buildings except one. And that's the FBI buildings. Downtown, the Verizon Center area, but it's a decay. Look at it now. Okay. You know?
And when you talk about writers and others exploiting blacks, it's my understanding that this HBO movie involves Eddie Murphy, it involves Spike Lee. What do you think about their role in it? Are they too exploiting us?
Absolutely. I mean, you have Dream City. Tom Sherwood and Jaffe, two white people exploiting black people. I'm not going to be a party to it at all.
But I was asking about Eddie Murphy and Spike Lee, about their involvement in it. Have you had the opportunity to speak with any of them? Did you have the opportunity to speak with HBO about this movie?
I've spoken with the president briefly, president of HBO film briefly, but that's not the issue. The issue is, why should I let two white men exploit a black man like me? I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to be party to it. I expect the great majority of the nation doesn't support that.
Well, do you think that as reporters they have a right to write what they see as the 20 years of history of the city? You think that by virtue of being white, they don't have the right to write about it at all?
They have a right to exploit a black person, a black people. And Tom Sherwood and Harry Jaffe all exploiting me, a black man, trying to exploit me, won't get away with it, and exploiting black people. That book is so full of misinformation. It's amazing.
So, like what? What's the kind of misinformation you find in the book?
I don't want to get bogged down in that thing, except that I refused to be interviewed by Harry Jaffe and Tom Sherwood because I knew they were going to use it to gain economically from me. I'm not going to let it happen that way.
How about Janetta Rose Barris's book, The Last of the Black Emperors? What do you think about that?
It's worse than Dream City. Janetta Barris, Janetta Barris has been anti-black and black men all of her career. That's a fact.
All right, let me go to the phones. Here's Emmanuel in Crofton, Maryland. Emmanuel, you're on the air. Go ahead, please. Emmanuel, are you there? Uh-oh, Emmanuel doesn't seem to be there any longer. In that case, let me go to Wanda. in Washington, D.C. Wanda, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Kojo, for taking my call.
You're welcome.
And, I want to say that if people would just go and take the time to review some of the videos that have been made about Marion Barry. I did a voiceover recently for his Mr. Barry, for your birthday tribute. And every time that I read and do a voiceover about your story, it moves me in many, many ways, politically, economically, spiritually. So I think, although people think they know you, I think the last video that was done, this birthday tribute to you, is phenomenal. People should go and see it and listen to it and hear your story. I was just honored to be able to do the voiceover for that tribute video.
Care to comment on that, Mayor Barry?
I agree that it's time to stop the exploitation of black people by white reporters and white people who trying to get economic gain for themselves.
Rufus Catfish Mayfield, your former partner at Pride Incorporated, told the city paper that he feels there's a double standard in reporting when it comes to mistakes that black politicians make. Do you agree with him?
Absolutely.
How
it is known that disproportionately black people are disproportionately reported on compared to white people. It doesn't. The facts are there.
How would you...
Damn to stop.
And I guess we can find this in your upcoming autobiography, but how would you characterize your own mistakes? What are the mistakes you feel that you may have made in your stewardship of the city and in your life?
I don't want to get bogged down in specific. I know when you look at the whole game, you balance it out. I want all 9 innings reported, not just one inning, or one mistake, or 2 mistakes, or 5 mistakes. I want to have the whole story looked at. And Dream City does not even begin to that. And the up-and-coming movie, which I hope to try to kill, doesn't do that.
It's my understanding that in your upcoming autobiography, you will say that the 1990 arrest that led to your leaving office was simply a night of embarrassment. Is that how you see it?
No. I see it as a night of the power of the federal government coming down. It so happens that 9 jurors out of 12 voted for acquittal on all charges. The 3 white men voted for conviction. That's clear.
And you feel that was but one small incident in what you see as a successful career?
Absolutely. Very much so.
And you said the book will be coming out when?
June 17th.
June?
We're going to launch it in New York, June 17th. It's going to be power-packed. It's going to be truthful. It's going to be aspirational. It's going to be everything good that can happen to a black man who had beaten innumerable odds. All that I've overcome them.
And before I let you go, I have to ask, how are you feeling now?
Oh, I know. I was ill for a while. I had a blood infection. Almost took me out. Blood infections kill about a third of people who get it. And God bless me to have good doctors, and some good antibiotics. So I'm back now, about 90% back. And I'm talking a little softly because I'm at this hearing on affordable housing.
Are you aware that one of the leading candidates for the mayor of Newark, Ras Baraka, the son of Amiri Baraka, has cited you as an important role model?
Yeah, I heard about that.
I thought I would be the first one informing you about that. I read about that over the weekend. But Mayor Barry, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Let's stop the exploitation. Let's start the exploitation by Tom Sherwood and Harry Jaffe. I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it. Right about back.
Marion Barry is the former mayor of Washington. He's now the council member representing Ward 8. Tom Sherwood and Harry Jaffe maintained a noble silence during the course of that interview. But you said 20 years ago that you felt that Al Harrington an African-American police officer who played an important role in the police investigation into Marion Barry during the late 80s and early 90s, was central to this story. Why did you feel that way? Because I think you said in 1994 that he was in some ways the hero of the book as it was originally published.
Well, Al Arrington has.
Say who he is.
He was I was about to. He was a police officer with the MPD, and he was on the. He investigated Marion Barry, and it was not necessarily the FBI that took Marion Barry down. It was Al Arrington and Jim Pollock, two MPD investigators, who did the real investigative work. Al Arrington was a sharecropper's son, as was Marion Barry, and Al Arrington was in many ways the mirror image of Marion, except that he took a different route. And we wrote the blow-by-blow crime story of how Arrington and Pollock broke down the wall of silence that Marion's police officers who were in his contingent, security contingent, and other friends had built up around him. So it wasn't the FBI that investigated Marion Barry. It was Al Arrington and Jim Pollock, two MPD cops.
And who had his hand on the door
At the time of
the
the
Vista Hotel? Was that?
Yeah,
was that Al Arrington?
It was, well, and Al Arrington got to Marion Barry first.
said he'd been investigating for years, but he was very torn at the point at which
He was.
he had to arrest him because
his heart was broken.
It's a dramatic moment when he bursts into the room ahead of the FBI agents and yelling and screaming, and he can't see anything in that dark room but he gets over there, and it's really a dramatic moment where he confronts Barry.
and he said this to himself, this is a brother that I'm doing this to. Even though I've been chasing him for years, all of a sudden you felt that pang. It's just one of the complications of race in the politics of the District of Columbia that you can find in Dream City, and most probably can also find in Marion Barry's upcoming autobiography coming out. He said June the 17th is
That's
the
what
date
he
of
said.
that. June the
In
date
New
of
York,
17th.
a New York launch.
Mayor Barry is a man who says he's never had permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interests, and you should know that his relationship with Harry Jaffe and Tom
Pretty
Sherwood
permanent
and
with Harry.
And it will continue.
yours truly and others over the years has been up and down, on and off. But thank you very much, Marion Barry, for joining us, and Tom Sherwood, thank you for joining us.
Have a good afternoon. Thank
Harry
you for having me in the
Jaffe,
book.
good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Together
as
they
always.
are the co-authors of Dream City, Race, Power, Decline, and Revival of Washington, D.C. It's now available for the first time as an ebook through Amazon.
and
complete-
other
Sources?
sources.
Complete
Absolutely.
with a new preface and afterward. That's true. Thank you all for listening. I'm Kojo now.